Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're here to discuss an issue of the utmost importance, whether this House would allow just following orders as an admissible defense on a war crime. And what I believe on side opposition that both me and my partner have done have clearly shown you reasons why this is not should be true. Because what my partner told me is that we have to prioritize rational thought, ladies and gentlemen, is that people have a responsibility to be morally appropriate in all circumstances. And we think that there is a certain type of criteria for admissible defenses. And we think that that criteria is that you have to justify why you acted in the manner that you did and why you made the choices that you did. And the reason why that just following orders does not comply with that criteria of admissible defense is for the same reason that my partner kept telling me about, is the fact that we have free will, ladies and gentlemen. And ultimately, we think that this resolution really only applies to soldiers of democratic nations, because we think that in developing nations there really isn't a clear, military structure. There isn't a clear military hierarchy in which you're going to be able to depict which are the subordinates which carried out the war crimes. We don't think that the International Criminal Court have actually ever gone after the subordinates of a soldier in an army in a developing nation for that very same reason. So we think that the only subordinates who this resolution who are really accountable to are those in democratic nations. Now this is important, it's an important distinction that side proposition should make, because under any democratic nation, you have that freedom of choice when it comes to things such as your vocational operations in an army, ladies and gentlemen. We think that their first argument about intent and context doesn't really make sense, ladies and gentlemen, because they said that the only right that people should have is this right to self-preservation. We think that's a very outdated concept. We think that's a concept that is dated, hundreds of years from the times of like Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. But we think that society has chosen that from that movement on, that the only right individuals have isn't the right to self-preservation, but we have rights in order to ensure that everybody in society can live a better life, ladies and gentlemen. That's something we don't see that side proposition have dealt with. We think that they tried to prove this example using with the crime of murder. So note that murder isn't particularly a war crime. Moreover, if murder was a war crime and it was in the context of, say, murdering innocent civilians, we think that soldiers should have the same ethical responsibility as doctors to have when they sign off a Hippocratic oath, when doctors have a mandate to the health of humans. Similarly, we think that soldiers should have a higher level of responsibility, a responsibility towards peace, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think that soldiers can justify their actions by simply blaming it on their superiors. They say on side proposition is that soldiers are soldiers because they simply want to kill for their country. We think that's not true. We think that on side opposition that soldiers are soldiers because they want to protect their country and want to create peace, ladies and gentlemen. War crimes does not in any way lead to peace, ladies and gentlemen. War crimes does not in any way lead to the protection of their own country. That's something that side proposition should understand. Moreover, in this, their first time about intent and context, what my partner really questioned them on this, and we've never heard a response in this debate, is that, well, how do you differentiate intent? Like, how are you able to tell that this person was actually intentionally committing this crime, or they were doing it under the orders of a superior, ladies and gentlemen? And we think that there are many different possibilities of this. We think that, if committing the war crime was your intent, well, then the answer is obvious. You've committed the war crime under your own actions. But moreover, if that was not your intentional intent, then why did you commit that war crime? Well, we think that, if the first reason is that, I had no particular reason, it was not my intent to commit a war crime, but I did it anyway, we think that you should require very severe rehabilitation sentences. But secondly, we think that if there was a reason in which why you didn't commit your war crime, then the question should be asked, why didn't you pursue the alternatives? Because I've already shown you, ladies and gentlemen, that this resolution applies to democratic nations, in which there are alternatives than blindly believing in your superiors.
So we should just disobey our superiors?
We should disobey our superiors when it comes to violating fundamental human rights, when it comes to not fulfilling your duty to promote peace across the world, ladies and gentlemen. We think that if you're a soldier in the American government and your superior tells you to murder innocent civilians or pillage and rape innocent women in other countries, you have that moral responsibility to not do so because you're a soldier, because you want to protect your country. These actions don't protect your country, nor do they promote peace, ladies and gentlemen. Moreover, we think that under democratic nations, there are alternatives. You can go to lobby groups, you can go to interest groups who can petition for your actions. You can, ladies and gentlemen, take your story to the media, because that would, promote transparency within the military, showing that such actions are occurring and that they shouldn't occur no longer. There are all alternatives. People can consult other lawyers, ladies and gentlemen. People in democratic nations should be able to consult other superiors. We don't think that this blind trust in their superiors is something we should have in democratic nations, because my partner has clearly proven to you this idea of moral responsibility, ladies and gentlemen. That's something that side proposition haven't understood. Now what I'd like to get into inside opposition's third and final argument, which is the purpose of war crimes. We think that the reason why we have war crimes in the Geneva Conventions is that it outlines, how a just war should be fought, to limit the atrocities of war to the combatants and the nations within it. And we think that letting people off because they've shifted their burden to someone else won't get the message across, ladies and gentlemen. And this is what me and my partner have really trouble with. There are two other arguments: the authenticity of court and hearing both sides of the story. Because we've shown you how this blame game idea can occur, in which you're going to be creating all this noise within the criminal court. Like, I'm going to be blaming, if I was a criminal and I was blaming other people and they were blaming other people, you're just going to get this chain of blame, and you're going to have all these admissible evidences, and all it is going to create all this noise in the criminal court, which both the judge has to sift through. So it really impairs the function of the court. It doesn't really make it authentic. Moreover, we think that the purpose of the court is to provide proper retribution to the victims, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that that retribution should not be sacrificed in any way just because you are blindly following the orders of your superior. Moreover, we think another prime reason of having a criminal court such as this is for deterrence. And we think that that was why we have these, where we persecute war crimes in the first place, so that such actions don't continue to happen and such actions don't occur. Because what side proposition is doing is that they're creating this loophole, ladies and gentlemen, in which essentially it creates this loophole in which countries can blatantly violate the Geneva conditions. And because there's this caveat within the law saying that you can just shift the blame to your superiors. You can shift the legal responsibility to someone else. We think that this is not at all conducive to corruption, and it shows that a lack of this moral integrity and discipline to principles. But we think that this overall overrides that fundamental underlying reason why we have criminal courts in the first place, for persecuting war crimes, so that we can have a just and safe war, so that war can be fought out by limiting the damage of war to only the combatants and the nations involved. You don't harm other people, innocent lives, and innocent civilians. So what have I done here for you today as second opposition? I've flashed against all three of their arguments about this idea of, there should be this intent and this context should be taken into consideration, the authenticity of this court. And the last argument about hearing both sides of the story was more along the same lines as their second argument, about how you need to hear both sides of the situation. But they said that this leads to forgiving when you are able to prosecute your superiors, ladies and gentlemen. But we don't think that if your family was dying, or your family was killed by someone, proper justice, proper forgiveness will only occur when the subordinate who committed the actions are properly held accountable. For these reasons, we beg to oppose.